Vennligst reis opp.
Please be seated. Good afternoon, and welcome to this public defense of the thesis entitled Groin Injuries in Women's Football. Today's candidate, Solveig Thorarinsdottir, completed her thesis in August 2025. Based on a proposal from the Department of Sports Medicine, the Research Committee of the Norwegian School of Sports Sciences has appointed the following committee to judge the thesis and other requirements of the award. Professor Jorunn Sundgodt-Borgen, Norwegian School of Sports Sciences, Chair. Professor Keith Stokes, University of Bath, First Opponent. Professor Joanna Quist, Linköping University, Second Opponent. The committee has concluded that the thesis meets the standard worthy of a public defense for the award of Doctor of Philosophy, PhD, in sports science. Earlier today, the candidate has given a trial lecture with the following title: The Evidence Base for Exercise Programs in Sports Injury Prevention, Efficacy in Trials and Effectiveness in the Field. The trial lecture has been found satisfactory by the examination committee. I would now like to ask the candidate to introduce her doctoral research in the form of a short lecture, and the opposing members of the examination committee to engage the candidate in the defense of her work. Should members of the audience wish to ask questions relating to the research, I ask you to bring these in written form to the attention of the chairperson in the break prior to the second opponent's questions. I now ask the candidate to take place at the lectern.
Okay. Dear Prorector, committee, supervisors, colleagues, family, friends, everyone, thank you all for being here today for my PhD defense. It's really nice to see you all. In the next 20 minutes or so, I will summarize my PhD thesis on groin injuries in women's football. But first, let me tell you a little background for why in 2019, when I started my PhD journey, we wanted to know more about groin injuries in women's football. Because women's football has come a long way. This picture is from the 1920, a year before a 50-year-long ban was announced on women playing football at the professional pitches of clubs affiliated with the Football Association in England. Now, in 2026, women's football is one of the fastest growing sports globally. The English Football Association reports that between 2020 and 2026, the number of women and girls playing football increased by 56%. With more participation comes more interest and attention, not only from governing bodies and investors, but also sports scientists. So on this graph, you see the number of published articles within women's football from the year the ban was lifted, 1970, to the year 2020. And we see that the number of publications within women's football are on the rise. But we still see a dramatic difference in the amount of publications when compared to men's football over similar time periods. So we still have a lot to learn about our female players. One thing we did know in 2019 was that the physical demands had soared in only a few years and that the game had gotten much faster. So in only 4 years between the World Cup in 2015 and World Cup 2019, the amount of sprinting in a game increased almost 30%. Creating a hypothesis that this increased speed of the game could be changing the injury risk the players faced. So we asked ourselves if muscle injuries might be becoming more common, groin injuries included. Because in 2018, a prospective cohort study of a single team in the Spanish Women's Premier League was published and reported hip and groin injuries to be 16% of all timeless injuries, which was higher than previously had been reported. We've known for a while that groin injuries are a problem in men's football, and that the adductor injuries represent around 2/3 of the injuries, which is why that has been the focus of prevention for the last decades. But we didn't know what the biggest groin problem was for women, and therefore didn't know where to put our focus in prevention. Therefore, before the 2020 season, we initiated the Ready to Play project in the Norwegian Women's Premier League to provide updated surveillance data with a focus on groin and hamstring injuries, with me focusing on groin injuries and the already Dr. Roar Amundsen focusing on the hamstring injuries. So my thesis is based on 3 papers, all now published. The first 2 are based on the Ready to Play project. And the third was a randomized trial investigating the effects of the adductor strengthening program. So now we'll look at one paper at a time. So paper 1, where I share first authorship with Roar Amundsen, was a 2-season prospective cohort study of all health problems in the Norwegian Women's Premier League, where we aim to describe the prevalence, incidence, and burden of all health problems in the league. This was the first study to use the OSTRC questionnaire on health problems to record all health problems in women's football, irrespective of time loss or medical attention. This method has been found to better capture the true burden of gradual onset injuries, which groin injuries often are. These type of injuries often do not cause time loss from football, as players continue to play despite their symptoms. In 2019, we knew from men's football that the time loss definition captured around 10 to 13% of the groin injuries, so only the tip of the iceberg. So what we did is that we followed 11 teams over 2 seasons. The players gave a weekly health report, reporting any health problem in the last 7 days. And if they had a problem, they reported effect on their participation, modification to their training, effects on performance, and how much symptoms they had. Based on these answers, the players were categorized into being healthy, having a health problem, or having a substantial health problem. And then the player herself gave us more details, like the location of the injury on a picture, and details as time loss in training and match exposure. And then the team physical therapist diagnosed the health problems reported by the players using the sport medicine diagnostic coding system. So in paper 1, we followed 294 players over the 2 seasons. They answered on average around 80% of their weekly questionnaires, and the physical therapist diagnosed 71% of the injuries and 38% of the illnesses. At any given time, 1 in 3 players had a health problem, and 1 in 5 had a substantial health problem, at least moderately reducing her performance or participation. Which means that in a normal training week of a team with 23 players, 5 players had to reduce their training volume or did not perform as well as they could. We found 44% of the over 700 new health problems reported to be of sudden onset injuries. 35% were gradual onset injuries, and 21% were illnesses. But if you only look at the 558 new injuries, the gradual onset injuries actually accounted for 44% of the injuries, which was more than previously reported. The most common injury location was the thigh, including the 3 most common single diagnoses: hamstring, quadriceps, and the adductor muscle injuries, followed by the knee and ankle. However, when we looked at severity of injuries and percentage of the total time loss, the knee injuries were most severe, accounting for 42% of the total time loss, including the most severe single diagnosis, ACL injuries. This was followed by the ankle and thigh injuries. Concussion is also worth a mention, as that was the second most severe diagnosis after ACL injuries. In paper 2, the second paper from the Ready to Play project, we did an in-depth study of the groin injuries reported during the 2 seasons. There, we aimed to describe the clinical and imaging characteristics of groin injuries in women's football using standardized protocols. So players who reported problems in these 2 areas, marked green and orange in the picture, were further investigated by their team physio. Using a standardized clinical examination with the main purpose of classifying the groin injuries according to the Doha classification system into adductor-related, iliopsoas, inguinal, pubic, hip joint related, and rectus femoris. Yeah, hip joint related, and then we added rectus femoris as a diagnosis. The groin injuries were eligible for an MRI investigation if they caused 3 days or more time loss, or symptoms had lasted 2 weeks or more. And the main results were that 124 groin injuries were reported over the 2 seasons, accounting for 18% of all injuries. Around half of these injuries were clinically examined by their team physio. And what's important to note here is that these 67 injuries examined were more severe than those not examined, and caused around 80% of the total time loss from groin injuries. So mostly milder injuries that did not get examined. Most of the injuries had a gradual onset, and the most common mechanisms reported were kicking and running. The most common clinical entity was adductor-related injuries, followed by the iliopsoas and proximal rectus femoris. So the hip flexors together accounted for 27% of the injuries, while other entities were less common. But if we look at the severity in terms of days lost per entity in total, we see that the few pubic-related injuries caused the most time loss, 300 days, followed by the adductors and then the hip flexors. 42 groin injuries were also examined with an MRI. And what's important to note here is that the median time between players' first symptoms and the MRIs was 27 days. This long time can, to some extent, be explained by the gradual onset nature of most of the injuries, making them possibly eligible for an MRI after 2 weeks. We divided MRI findings into acute and non-acute findings. Acute was a finding of a musculotendinous injury that could be graded on a scale from 1 to 3. Grade 1 is edema, grade 2 is a partial tear, and grade 3 is a complete tear. We found 6 cases with 1 or more acute findings, so not many. 2 of them were in the adductors, both grade 1 injuries, and 1 of them in the adductor longus and 1 of them in the gracilis muscle. And then 4 were located in the rectus femoris. 2 were grade 1 injuries and 2 were complete tears. The non-acute findings included 16 additional parameters that were based on the work of Sonja Bracchi and Andreas Serner and their colleagues. This includes, for example, bone marrow edema, pubic symphysial changes, and tendinopathies. And the main finding here was that non-acute findings were common in all were common on the player's injured site in all entities and found in 76% of cases. But these findings were also common to find on the player's non-injured site in over 50% of cases. Okay, so now knowing that adductor injuries were common, next we wanted to know what was the most effective protocol to implement for groin injury prevention in women's football. So, in paper 3, we did a randomized trial comparing 2 protocols of the adductor strengthening program in female football players. The adductor strengthening program is based on a low-volume protocol of the Copenhagen adduction exercise and has 3 levels of difficulty. The most difficult one at the top and the easiest one here at the bottom. And this program has been found to be able to lower the risk of groin injuries by 41% in male football players. Research on male players also indicates that the Copenhagen adduction exercise seems to increase hip adductor strength in a dose-response manner. But the effect of this program had not been investigated in female players. So in paper 3, we aimed to investigate if an 8-week high-volume protocol of the adductor strengthening program was more effective than the original low-volume protocol, increasing and maintaining hip adduction strength in female football players. So 52 players from 3 teams in first and second division were individually randomized into either a low or a high-volume group. Both groups trained for 8 weeks in the preseason, and the high-volume group or protocol had almost double the repetitions in total over the 8 weeks. Then in season, we added a 10-week maintenance period where both groups trained alike, once a week, 2 sets of 8 repetitions. We used the force frame to measure long lever adductor squeeze strength in 2 positions, and we measured it at baseline and after the 8-week training period and after the 10-week maintenance period. So the main results here were that 40 players completed the intervention per protocol, 22 in the low volume and 18 in the high volume. And both groups performed around 80% of their intended sessions. But what's important to note here is that for a proper statistical power, we needed 23 players in each group to detect a 15% difference in the adductor strength gain. So we were slightly underpowered in all our analysis. At week 8, we found no difference in strength gain between the groups. So both groups improved their strength over the 8 weeks in both testing positions. The same was to say after the 10-week maintenance period, so no difference between the groups, and both groups managed to maintain their strength over the 10-week maintenance period. So if we summarize these findings in the perspective of prevention, from the Ready to Play project, we learned that these body areas are the most common and severe injury locations, and therefore worth focusing on in our preventative measures in women's football. Here we have the knee and maybe the ACL injury especially, muscle injuries in the thigh, hamstring, quadriceps, and the adductors, ankle, and concussion. For groin injuries, it seems like a good investment to focus on the adductors, but we did find more hip flexor injuries than previously reported by men, and our mechanisms for all the injuries were mostly kicking and running, including a hip flexion movement. So it could be a good idea to add the hip flexor exercise as well. And our results indicate that an 8-week high-volume protocol of the adductor strengthening program was not more effective in increasing or maintaining hip adductor strength in female players, possibly making the low-volume protocol more feasible to implement as a preventative measure, as it takes less time and effort, highly appreciated by players and coaches. But as our results were underpowered, these results need to be confirmed in a properly powered study. So here's my dream team who helped make this project possible. My supervisor, Merete Møller, and Roald Barr, who's not here. And my fantastic co-workers. A huge thank you to the players and the physios and the top share, and this project would not exist without you. And we are also thankful for the support from the Football Association and the Idrettens Helsesenter. It takes a lot of effort from a lot of people to help one person finish their PhD. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Solveig, for presenting your thesis. I now invite the first opponent, Keith Stokes, to engage the candidate in a defense of her work.
Yeah, better make sure that's turned on. Well done. Really enjoyed your presentation, your summary. Thank you very much. It really is an honour and a privilege to be here today. I know it's a really important day for you and all of your supporters. So to have an opportunity to be part of this is really exciting for me as well. And our job as opponents is to challenge you and ask some questions which will put you under a bit of pressure. I know that sometimes makes us the bad guys, and so just to explain for everybody, we're not nasty all the time, but that does mean that actually we're under lots of pressure as well, because your home crowd is judging our questions just as much as they're judging your answers. So I feel the pressure of this honour. So, but yeah, don't forget you've got home advantage here. So we'll go through a series of questions that hopefully, as I say, will challenge you a bit. Some of them might be a bit kind of coming from left field and not necessarily be expected. Some of them will be very straightforward. But I'll start with something that you talked about this morning. So you talked about some frameworks and models that have kind of inspired your work, but you used them in terms of just introducing some of the ideas this morning. So you talked about the Van Mechelen model, you talked about the TRIP model, and you talked about those in your thesis as well. Which of those really inspired you, or which model overall inspired you to do the work, and why?
I mean, yeah, the Van Mechelen is like included in the TRIP, so I would say basically both. Mm-hmm. In terms of especially maybe the last, the paper 3, when we were investigating efficacy. But We are at the step 1. I mean, we are not doing the whole trip like all the way to the step number 6, but we are in step number 1 when we do our surveillance study. And then we were actually going to move into step number 2, but that didn't happen, so we jumped right into step number 3. So we are in the Van Mechelen model, but again used maybe some ideas from the TRIP model as well when we were designing the adductor strengthening program study in terms of the players having a choice in when they, or the coaches having a choice when they did the exercises and some small things like that. Yeah.
Okay, no, that makes sense. And I know we'll perhaps come back to the risk factor study later on that didn't happen, but in your thesis you also talk about a couple of other models, including the kind of the complex approach, the Bittencourt approach. Do you have any, because that didn't really feed into the rest of the studies, but what's your take on that model as it stands?
Absolutely, that's a fair point. I mean, I don't use the complex model at all. And basically when we were planning this risk factor study, it was this linear model, the simple one that we were thinking. So we were investigating one thing, hip adductor strength against the groin injury in season, and assuming some form of linearity between the two. But that's also maybe, and that's also why we didn't do it, because usually you want that outcome and exposure to be kind of close together. But the complex model is more effectiveness. If I refer to the talk I did performed this morning, like it's messier, but it's more realistic because that's injuries. Like there are so many factors that can affect a person and be the reason for why she gets injured. And there will be factors that play together and at certain points. And so the complex model is more complex, and that's why it's difficult to use it maybe in research. Okay. But the linear model is simpler in a research perspective. And I mean, I think it's important. And again, I don't think one is better than the other. So both are important, because if we have complex models but don't know the unique pieces within the model, like we need to establish these causalities or relationships to make sense of the complex model, if you will. Yeah.
That makes sense. You preempted my next question, so you're way ahead of me. So this is great. So yeah, I was going to ask around, how do you really use the complex model? Because I think that's from a research perspective, that's quite challenging, right? It's clearly conceptually very good. But yeah, I mean, are you aware of any examples where that has actually been used to inform?
I'm not.
No, so I'm not at the moment.
No.
Either, so.
Are you?
No, I don't know. So which is a shame, because it is a great model. But I think everyone has the same challenges that you do as well. So clearly from the outset, your plan was groin injuries, and you talked a little bit about it there. Thinking about going back to the either Van Mechelen or TRIP model, would you typically go into that with a view of saying, right, I'm going to do groin injuries from the outset, or not? So what?
No, I mean, you would first, and that's maybe like the first article was to kind of answer the question: is there a problem? I mean, groin injuries have been this more of a man problem than a woman's, and I've gotten this question actually a few times. When I say what I do, I was like, oh, is that a problem? So that was the first question. So see groin injuries in a bigger perspective of all the other injuries. So no, it didn't have, or no. So that was the plan, to see if it really was a problem, and then go further.
Yeah, and we've got limited time, of course. So you try and be as efficient as possible. So you use the same group to do your
Absolutely.
phase 2. But I guess so if we were in an ideal world, we would potentially do stage
that
1 first, and then, but we'd be here in another 50 years.
I basically based it on a clinical experience.
Absolutely, yeah.
And a personal one.
Okay.
So.
Which is really important.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I guess we often forget that you showed the base of the pyramid earlier. That kind of our just knowledge is still knowledge. So no, I think that's fair enough. So then, fundamental to your approach was the use of kind of self-report, and obviously I wouldn't get out alive if I said this was a terrible approach or anything. So I fully support what a great tool you used. But just exploring that a little bit, all injuries and all injury data collection is to some extent relying on athletes' attitudes towards injuries and attitudes to reporting injuries. Is there any literature around that which you're aware of that in terms of how likely athletes are to actually report injuries?
Yes, I mean there are, when you report an injury to someone, it matters who's on the other side. So we know that. We also know that there are other contextual factors that matter. I mean, the importance of the player can actually matter. The time of the season can matter. Yeah. Is there a very big game next week and I'm not going to miss it and I'm not going to tell her I'm injured? I mean, yes. So there we have evidence that contextual factors play a role here if the players report an injury.
And I guess so based on the evidence in the literature, what are the key things that a player will say as to why they don't report injuries?
Yeah, I think the first thing that pops into mind is basically I don't want to report this because then I won't be able to play. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. So yeah, and then basically the trust they have in the person on the other end, and we also, if something was done with that information, so then if the one on the other side actually said, hey, I saw you reported this, do you need something, can I help you? It's so much more likely that I will report my injuries because I see that this person wants to help me than if there's just nothing on you're reporting to a wall, basically.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that often strikes me is that in some of the attitude studies, it's actually not letting your teammates down in team sport, which comes up as a really high. So now, how much of that is athletes trying to externalize their reasons rather than just not wanting to miss the game? But it's kind of so I think there are some interesting things. I guess do you think that affects other methods of data collection, i.e. by practitioners, more or less than filling in something on an app around self-report? Do you think that the attitudes will have more of an effect, one or the other?
More effect if they are self-reported than if...
Yeah, I mean, I guess the attitude to reporting an injury is going to be there, but do you think that doing it slightly more impersonally on an app and self-reporting it versus actually having to go and seek medical support?
Yeah, I mean, I would think it would be easier to do a report on an app than go into the medical staff and tell them about it. Absolutely. And that's what we see. We capture more injuries when we use self-report than when doing medical staff time loss reports, or medical staff also capturing, like comparing the same methods, collecting the same. Basically, you have more injuries with self-report than with medical staff reporting, yes.
Yeah, and some of that's convenience and some of that may be attitudes as well. And then the other side of this, and so you know, injuries are easy to capture because they're kind of broadly, you know, do you have an injury or a pain or something, yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
Exposure, of course, is really important as well. And so, you know, if you've got self-reported injuries and self-reported exposure is also, it makes sense.
Yeah.
How do you have any validity data on the exposure reporting?
That's a really good question. I remember that in the study by Agnete Nilstad, where she compared self-report injuries and exposure to they were both collecting time-loss injuries, to medical staff collecting injuries and exposure. And the self-report reported much more injuries than the time lost, but the exposure was actually the same.
Okay.
In both cases, they were reported the week, like you had to report previous weeks, so there will always be some form of recall bias, maybe. And we know that the earlier you ask, the more maybe precise data you will get. But yeah, but that's the only thing maybe I can think of right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of anything. I think one of the interesting things that we see is that male players at least, seem to overestimate. So I guess that there's a question both in terms of self-report, in terms of injury and exposure, whether there may be a difference between men's and women's sport.
Yeah, I haven't seen data on women, but it makes sense in a way. Is this, what's it called? Social positivity bias or something, that you tell, I train more than I train and I don't know, drink less than I drink or whatever, so I think it's, I mean, I can see, but I don't know if there is any evidence for like a systematic over-reporting in women. But this is the only study that I know of that didn't see any effects, at least. Yeah. But yeah.
And so when you were cleaning the data, you looked and you checked that you mentioned there are some kind of ridiculous number of hours exposure, or people saying that they had 4 ACLs in 1 week and things like that.
Yeah.
So what was your process for cleaning that up? Was that systematic, or was it kind of, it has to be absolutely ridiculous for us to discard it?
Yeah, I actually can't remember the cutoff, or if you put like a specific cutoff. So, and it wasn't, I don't know if it was like 3 times, or I can't remember how many, but they were like ridiculous numbers. That, they'd counted minutes when they were supposed to count hours or something. Yeah. So it was like really obvious, and only in those cases.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And okay. So I guess no data collection tool is perfect, but I guess in terms of the things that you might miss using this approach, do you think that it's the same sort of things, i.e. the less severe ones, that you miss with other approaches as well, albeit this is more inclusive?
I think self-report is probably more inclusive, that we get more of the milder injuries than, for example, if we only collect, or medical staff collects the injuries. But of course, with medical staff reporting, you get more details. So that's a good thing about including medical staff in your data collection. Mm.
Yeah. And then one thing around the idea of gradual onset injuries and more minor injuries is the idea of catching injuries early to either prevent them getting worse or potentially to prevent another injury down the line. Was there any evidence in anything that you did that you can capture injuries early when they're niggles before they really present, or how could you do that if you haven't?
We didn't do an analysis for that, but like Matt Whalen in Australia did do Nichols Matter in his article. so I can only talk as a clinician now, basically. Yes, they do, usually. And especially maybe with these gradual onset injuries, they start slow with maybe some symptoms. And I have graphs for the groin injuries, and they are these mountains, like they start slowly and they top and they miss 2 trainings, but then the symptoms go not away, but continue, but under the time loss threshold, and then, maybe they disappear and maybe they come back, and So it's, clinically, I would answer the question yes, but we didn't do any such analysis.
Because there were a proportion of your players who you did then also get a practitioner to record, but I think that's 71% for injuries.
That was only the groin injuries and the hamstring injuries, yes.
And so the kind of 30% that didn't get, was that because typically they had resolved? Or?
Oh, you mean because, the physical therapist only diagnosed 71% of the injuries. That's possible. It's very possible that those are minor injuries because, although I'm not certain, so I'm now talking maybe, because many of the teams did not have a physiotherapist at every training. There were 2 teams the first season that did not have a physio at training and only in matches. So if a player got injured on a Monday and that game was on a Friday or a Sunday, maybe that player, the symptoms had resolved basically before she met her physio, possibly.
Yeah. So I guess it would be really interesting to, if it was possible to follow.
That's really interesting. Yeah, absolutely.
Because then that helps to answer your question as a clinician.
Yeah.
Okay. So obviously we've got 2 very different environments in football in terms of matches and training. So in your study, you combined all of that. So you reported some of it as matches and training, but for most things you combined matches and training.
Yeah.
So why was that?
When we are reporting all health problems, we don't do match and training. We did that for the incidents to be able to compare to other research, but I actually don't know what we didn't do for the prevalence.
Because it's kind of, like I say, those based on the time loss incidence data, you've got it's almost 3 to 4 times higher rates of injuries in matches versus training. So you've got some very different environments. Would it be important to understand whether not only the rates are different, but actually the patterns of injury are different? And would that be important to know?
Yes, I think so. I think it could be an interesting question to ask.
Because I guess if all of your groin injuries were in matches, then that might be you might end up with a very different approach to try and prevent them than if they were all in training.
Absolutely.
Now, probably not the case, but that's an extreme example.
Yeah.
So I think there is potentially a reason to not split by match and training. Is there anything in terms of what you're focusing on? And
the gradual onset injuries, are more they don't have a sudden onset. So it's maybe not as likely that we find this difference. We will have, so it's in terms of that. We have this gradual onset injuries that usually, they will follow you into your match, but they will follow you into all of your training as well. So
they're the really challenging ones, right?
Yeah.
And I think that the method that you're using is great because it captures that, unlike most of the time loss injuries, where we capture some but not all gradual onset. But and then attributing I always find it difficult when people attribute a gradual onset injury to matches or training, which people do regularly, and that doesn't make sense to me. by definition, but
No.
what are your thoughts on
No,
that?
I agree. So you mean tribute, like this gradual onset injury happened in a match?
Yeah.
It's a sentence that, yeah.
It kind of it just so happened.
No, yeah.
Yeah. So I think so in terms of your incidence data, did you attribute any gradual onset injuries that resulted in time lost to matches or training, or was all the gradual onset taken out there?
No, I don't. It didn't matter if it was a gradual onset injury. It was only just needed to be a time loss injury. Yeah. So if it was a gradual onset injury that had no time loss and then 2 days with time loss, it's included. Yeah.
And so, I mean, why do you think there's a difference between matches and training in terms of?
Oh, it's the intensity, things at stake, and I don't know. You can also have if you have a gradual onset injury and maybe injuries that have not passed the threshold of a time loss injury, and you are willing to push yourself in the match, like you are going to play and see if it goes well, and it can go well, but you can also have symptoms or not train for 3 days afterwards. But,
so you think so part of it is a bit of a risk-taking around knowing that you might...
Risk-taking, yeah, you might you push yourselves more. There's more at stake. You don't want to let down your teammates. You're going to take that sprint down to the corner because the ball is going that way, even though your hamstring hurts maybe a little bit. So I think, so it's basically more intensity and more.
But from a training perspective, I mean, one of the differences is you potentially do more training, and so some of that is spent at much lower intensities.
Yeah.
So does that dilute things?
Yeah. Yes. So you have training. So the training exposure, I mean, is a lot more, and some of it is at lower intensity, where you're less likely maybe to injure yourself.
I mean, so I think again one of the I mean, training is so difficult to understand, right? I mean, it's really difficult because the exposure element becomes quite, whereas matches you go onto the pitch, you play for however many minutes, you come off, and that's fine.
Yeah.
In training, there's all sorts of other things going on, and I think it's a really interesting area, particularly around gradual onset injuries, that probably needs more attention. And I think that because players spend so much time training, and if you ask most players, they'll often say that the injury problem is in training, not matches, because they love matches. That's why they play.
Yeah.
And the training is kind of, well, I mean, it's like saying, which bit of your job do you not want to do? And it's like, well, I don't like the emails, so they're the things that cause me most stress. And I think that's a kind of an interesting perspective. But I mean, I guess some of training must be near match intensity, right?
Absolutely, and that's just periodization during the week. Yeah, so there will be trainings that should push players towards their maximum so they get better and don't get injured. Also, that they get used to the load and the intensity.
And that's the constant balance that
Absolutely.
coaches have to
that's why I'm glad to have a coach and a strengthening coach at my team. We will have full control over those data.
No. So thinking about that kind of idea around intensity, one of the things you talked about was the real changes in the women's game over a relatively short period. You used examples just in your presentation there of the number of sprints that you see in a game. Just give me a feel for what's really changed in the women's game overall. It's not just number of sprints, right? No, it's not just sprints. It's basically, I feel, everything. I mean, the professionality, the infrastructures and the teams, they have better trainers. They have, I mean, I work in a club now that I
played for 6 years ago. No, probably more, 10 years ago. No, like a long time ago. And I mean, to have a physio, like that was out of the question. And this team now has like a staff of 7 people. So there's a lot has happened, and probably just in the last 5 years also in this club I work in. So it's basically, staff, infrastructure, more money, resources, even though we can always do better. That's definitely a change that you see.
Yeah.
So there will be more training load. They train more often. But still mostly in the evening, at least they're not all professionals, and that's also the Norwegian league. That's it's like 20% of the players who are professionals, and the others are, and 20% who are amateurs, and the most of them are somewhere in between. So maybe they have one day a week where they have this professional day, and then they get a day off from work and can train in the lunch or at lunchtime, which they usually can't.
Yeah. So a lot's changed very rapidly.
Yeah.
So there's some adjustment, and from your perspective, you're interested in what injuries occur, and you talk about an increase in injury rates over that period. So, as I was reading your thesis, I couldn't quite pick apart whether that was really true or not. What's the strong evidence that actually there has been a real change in incidence rates over the last 15, 20 years?
I'm not sure if it was for all the injuries or mostly for the muscle-related injuries. So we did see, we had this, so for example, this perspective study, it was from the Spanish Premier League that found more groin injuries than any study had done before. So that was published in 2018. And I mean, it was just small things like that. So it wasn't like that I had the amounts of data that just called, like, it was obvious, but it was this, so it was small, or it's not small, it was like 5 seasons, but only one team. But that study at least sparked this thought in my head, like, okay, I mean, 16% is that's more than the rest has found. And also the hamstring injuries. We had some data on the hamstring injuries that they might be increasing. But then we've maybe seen it more after we published the Red to Play. Yeah.
I mean,
that kind of.
And some of that is methods as well, right? I mean, there's an element that, particularly the method you used, you should be capturing more injuries because you're capturing more of the self-report, you said, captures more injuries, and yet the overall incidence wasn't actually that much higher than methods which are practitioner recorded time loss injuries. Your overall incidence wasn't that much higher?
No. Yeah. It was around 6.6.
Yeah.
I can't remember that.
So I think, and when with your confidence intervals, I think the lower confidence interval was 6, and some of the other point estimates were pushing 6, even though they were time loss practitioner recorded.
Yeah.
So
I think we looked at it in before 2000 something and after 2000 something, and there were more studies at this cutoff that had lower incidences, and so it wasn't like it had been this trend it's increasing, but maybe just so it was more that way of thinking, if you understand where I'm going.
The other thing is that consistently there are certain body locations which are at greater risk, but they kind of change around in order a bit, or soft tissue versus other. So it's kind of, but often we present that as percentages, and so it's interesting when we describe that the patterns are shifting, but maybe the incidence isn't shifting that much. what must be happening if, for example, we're saying that the overall incidence isn't changing a great deal, but we're getting more muscle injuries? That must mean that joint injuries are better. So what's going on?
Yeah. Either that joint injuries are better, or it must be that, because if we don't have an increase in total.
So I think we're always slightly in danger of being a bit gloomy about all of this, and always focusing on the things that we can do better, and trying to unpick what's changed there, because actually there's potentially an unexpected good news story in there, maybe, if some other things are going down, because they must be if you're filling up the pot with different injuries, then some of the other
something
ones
must be going down. Yeah.
But so understanding why that is possibly important. I guess the challenge for us is to slightly unpick what's going on. So I asked you what's changed in women's football, and you're like, everything. So how do we unpick that in terms of what impact that might have on injuries? So what are the various things that could be at play there in terms of, if we think about injury outcomes specifically, and specifically I'm thinking rates more than kind of severity. We can talk about that separately. But if we think about injury rates.
Yeah, thinking about exposure or
so
intensity.
exposure's gone up, we assume. Yeah, so fine. Intensity.
Gone up.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. What else have you said has changed? You said resources have changed.
Resources,
What would that do?
What would that do? I would assume it would reduce injuries, because we would hope that.
Yeah. But what would it also do? So it might reduce injuries, but what would we find more of? Also injuries, right?
Yeah, like they train more, or
But they also record it more. We're looking for it.
Right. That's a good point.
So more resources send us in two directions.
Yeah.
So it's it's great. We've got more resources, we'll prevent more injuries, and then your stats show, we've got more injuries.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's because you're better at looking. So if you look for something, you'll find it.
Absolutely.
So how do we go about really understanding what's going on here?
I don't know.
It's really tough, isn't it?
Yeah.
But what we tend to do, as the linear model shows, is we tend to go, okay, let's look at strength, or let's look at something.
Yeah, we collect
with all
risk
of this stuff
factors.
going on around. Then that's quite
look
interesting.
at single factors and see associations between them.
So, which is kind of, it's how we do it. It's reductionist, and it's how we do it, but not necessarily perhaps what we should be thinking about. So just, I'll perhaps come back to that in a minute, but just shifting gears slightly. Ultimately the idea here is to try and get coaches to care about this, get coaches to do something about it. How do you do that? How do you get a coach to say, groin injuries, I must do something about that?
You think in terms of like preventing them, like doing prevention work, or?
I mean, effectively spending time on that issue.
Yeah. I mean, you need to have a good argument. So you need to go basically through this research model. Like, is it a problem? And actually, how much of a problem? Is it worth my time, basically? Do we have a problem that's bigger? And I mean, you would, according to your resources, rank these. So if you have so and so much time or resources, you're going to focus on maybe 5 types of injuries. And if you don't, you may pick 2, because that's what you can afford of or have time for. To get people on your team or your side, I mean, you just have to, you have to reach out, I think. I mean, we as researchers need to, for example, we went down to the Norwegian Football Association and presented the work that they had supported us in doing. And it was very well received.
Okay.
Yeah, and they were interested, and basically, yeah, I felt like this journey had made sense when they actually put more money into after our project after the 2 years. They teamed up with.
So that's potentially two separate things, isn't it? Because money is policy.
Yeah.
And coaches are so.
But I felt, for example, like between the 2020 and 2021 season, we met with the clubs, and because they all do this pre-season testing at the idrettsmedisinske, or the FA medical center. And the teams that we met in the 2020 season, and we could tell them, do you know what? We went in and told the FA about you, and like they were really intrigued, and maybe something's going to happen, and this is what we do with your data, and this is why it matters. And we, I don't know, saw a difference in reportings by the teams that showed up for that and those who didn't, because they saw the purpose of it. So it's, I don't know, it will be finding the purpose for this coach. I mean, he needs to, or she needs to believe that it is a problem worth focusing on, and that her player basically will be more on the pitch than if she doesn't do this training. So basically, our pitch to the coach would be, she'll perform better, she can play more football, I guess.
And so so leaning on your own research, which of the statistics do you use there as your kind of, your really powerful message that you say, here's the evidence?
I think the 1 in 5, like if we think the total, that was like 1 in 5 does not play or perform as they should. So I feel like that was the one. And for the groin injuries, I mean it's kind of the same. I mean it's 30% of the players over the 2 seasons actually had a groin injury. But it's harder maybe with the gradual onset. I can't say they missed so and so much matches or whatever. But so it's maybe not as strong pitch, but.
So I think that's where I'm getting to a little bit, because it's kind of difficult to communicate this.
Yeah.
Because actually the coaches have the coaches are smart people, right? They've developed their own belief structure around what's going on, and they kind of need to think that they're right, because otherwise they wouldn't be doing. And so my experience has been, typically when you're looking at one specific injury, you go into a team or a club and they say, we don't have a problem with that because we only have 2 or 3 of those a year where someone loses time, and actually so that's fine, that just happens. And so whereas we as researchers zoom out and we look at population level and we look at these numbers and we go, wow, look how many of these happen across the whole the whole league, and so we think, and so we have a very different perspective, and actually trying to get into the coach and kind of say, well, hold on, this is what these numbers mean. My experience is that they just look at you and go, not a problem here, you need to look over there.
Yeah.
The club down the road is where you need to focus. Is that?
Yeah. I mean, and I think maybe, yeah. No, I get where you're going. And I think I would need to sell an adductor exercise as a performance enhancing something, absolutely. And maybe not mention the other stuff. But I feel like something's changing there, though. So I feel like some coaches are really, you can pitch the performance, but you can also talk about the injuries without them being like, oh, injury prevention's boring and I don't want to talk about it. They understand to more extent, I think, more and more.
I think in women's sport, it's better than men's sport.
I actually think so too.
I think that's really definitely a case.
Yeah.
So interesting. It's good, which is great.
Yeah,
which is great
because
to see.
actually, if I would pitch this to I would have no problem in my small club. But
Yeah.
so it's interesting.
And so in terms of the
Perspective.
players then, thinking about, because we obviously need to persuade them as well. I mean, one question around the self-report nature. Could players tell the difference between groin pain versus other pelvic health issues? Did that come through in any of the kind of clinical examinations or anything like that?
No, they can't. But that's the best part about having both the self-report and the medical staff. So they just have a pain in their groin and would report it. So that could end up in the groin, in our groin statistic. But we had these physios that would then examine them. And even though they didn't do it with a standardized examination, they did it with just their regular practice and put it in the system we used. So they should pick it up there, but we have 30% of the injuries that were not diagnosed, and that could be something that wasn't musculoskeletal.
I don't know what it's like here, but in the UK, kind of pelvic health in women's sport is just the thing that everyone's focusing on. It's kind of, this is, so when you talk about women's sport, it was menstrual cycle. Now everyone's realised that's quite difficult. So they've gone, okay, let's look at pelvic health and breast health. And so we've got kind of these, and pelvic health is just such a massive focus. And my sense is that from a player perspective, that they'd have more, they'd engage more with actually broader pelvic health than groin pain specifically. I don't know, is that something that's UK specific?
It's nothing I've seen in my clinical practice at least, but that could differ from team to team, I think, and maybe the interest around it, because that's also when everyone was talking about the menstrual cycle, everyone wanted to talk about their menstrual cycle and how it affected them and how they now realize that and everything like that. So I think if there's a lot of focus on pelvic health, I understand that if it's in the media or social media, say the least, I understand that would become more popular than doing groin exercises.
Sometimes we need to try and ride that wave when
absolutely,
when it comes
and I get it.
So.
I think we should, if it's an important message. Definitely, pelvic health is important.
And I think the other thing which is really good, that's coming through much more now in women's sport in the UK, is postpartum participation at elite levels as well, which is brilliant to see, because it was it just wasn't a thing previously, right?
Absolutely.
From the point of view of your work, is there any change in terms of any of the, or I guess the numbers are too small in your actual data, but would there be any postpartum changes in risk factors around groin injury?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question, because we had not many mothers in our cohort, but we had some, and being a mother and also just, there are two girls coming back from having birth in my team right now, and it's like it's gonna put a load on your pelvis and your groin area to both bear a child and give birth to it. So there will absolutely be some things that we need to consider postpartum. And I think we're going to know more and more about it in the years to come, when this becomes more normalized, and it will be the thing that we do. We have kids and we continue playing football.
Yeah, which is great, And so I suppose then looping back round to some of the conversation about models and some of the conversations about risk factors and the study that you didn't do. So in terms of the risk factors, so not necessarily what were you going to put into the risk factor model, but now, knowing what you do, what would you, because I mean, one of the problems with risk factor studies is that we kind of preconceive what are the important things, and so we look for those again, and you kind of, if you look for stuff, you find it. But what do you think would be the things that you would put into a risk factor model? What things would you try and measure to try and capture some of the things we've talked about?
Yeah, so basically we measured hip adductor strength and hip flexor strength at this periodic health evaluation in pre-season. And then we were going to see if that had an effect on if they got injured or had a groin injury in the season. And the process that we had gone through was this directed analytic graph. Am I saying it right? Yeah. So we drew this DAG with factors that we thought could potentially influence hip adductor strength and a groin injury in season. So we had mapped out previous injury, doing Copenhagen adduction in pre-season, because we had that from a questionnaire, Hager score, things we didn't measure, like sleep, nutrition, things like that on the injury side. So we had done this, so those were the things. We had data on if they had done any previous groin injury, injury prevention, like doing Copenhagen induction exercise or something like that. Previous injury in season, a Hager score, and that's what I remember at the moment.
They're all quite classical risk factors. They're the sorts of things we would always look at. But some of the discussion we've just had has been around how the game has changed. How some players are trying to juggle jobs, families.
Absolutely.
So how do you build? Because honestly, some of those kind of more social inputs are probably as important as whether you've ever done a Copenhagen plank
100%. And in a DAG, it maybe would not be a confounding factor, as we were measuring hip adductor strength in pre-season, and maybe if you are really tired because you have a job and school and football at a certain time, 4 months after that, may not affect the pre-season hip adductor strength, but it will be important if you get injured or not. It's going to affect your risk of getting injured. So I think absolutely we need to think in a bigger perspective when we think about injuries. We need to understand in what context our players live in, and that will differ. It will differ from team to team. In the Norwegian league, for example, some of the teams are pros and others are not, and that's a huge difference. So that's something you would consider.
So if you now go on to be a PhD supervisor, and you're trying to lay out a series of studies as part of your supervisee's program, would you include a risk factor study?
Yes, I think I would.
Why?
Because I think it's also important to know these single factors. So even though I just find out maybe there's association between the hip adductor strength and groin injuries, for example, it is one thing I get more clever about, or I can include and improve. So I think.
And do you think? So how would you set that up as a risk factor study? So because I'm less and less convinced that actually doing a risk factor study in isolation is because we pick, albeit we've got better processes for picking our risk factors, but we know there's so many things we can't measure very well. We know, and some really important things. So I kind of am less convinced that that's the way forward. Is there another way to pick out risk factors rather than necessarily doing a risk factor study? I mean, in some ways, for example, your final study,
Yeah.
you've done an intervention.
You mean just if we would just do an, you mean by doing a preventional trial without checking first if it is a risk factor, or no?
Yeah, I mean, or so if you've got something that you think is a good idea and you do your intervention study, you can measure all the same things that you were going to do in a risk factor study, right?
Yeah.
So do you need to
So
do
you don't
do
need
that
a
first?
separate one, you mean?
Do you need to do that
Yeah,
first
that's
and
a
then
point.
that next?
Mm.
Especially if you're changing some of the variables for one of them, then that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the other bit, I guess, and you talked about this earlier a little bit, is kind of single exercises or single targets versus whole body targets.
Mm-hmm.
So, for football, we're talking about FIFA 11 plus. What are the pros and cons of that kind of multi-injury, multi-joint, multi-whatever versus a single focus?
They take a long time. But also, if we're thinking like research-wise, it's easier to study effect mechanisms with a single exercise than a whole program for the whole body. And then also, but I think they're just made maybe for different contexts. The FIFA 11 Plus, like it's designed for non-professional setting where it's good to get a whole body warm-up before you go play some football with your friends. And then while the others, like if you have a team, a medical staff, that it's important to know what these single exercises do, and then you maybe construct a program with those single exercises that fit your team.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So
The pros are it fits really well in a non-professional environment.
Okay.
It works as a warm-up. But the other are more, you know what you're doing. I know I'm building adductor core strength by staying in the Copenhagen plank, for example.
So how long does your intervention take?
5 minutes.
Okay, and then if you're also worried about knee injuries in your team, how long would that take? And then if you're also interested about ankle injuries, and I mean, let's face it, that knee and ankle and hamstring add up to probably more than groin.
Yeah.
So how long, if you start to say, okay, let's prioritize these, how long do you spend on each of those?
I think it will always be a holistic, approach. And I think the best thing about the Copenhagen adduction exercise is that it's a core exercise as well. You are in a plank. So I think, so that's, in the FIFA 11 Plus, for example, you have the Nordic hamstring, you have these single exercises. So it's basically, you can either do that, it's like a product, it's already made, or you can mix and match from those different single exercises we have and make yourself a program that's maybe more either individualized or built for your context or team. Or
which, I think is...
I don't...
Go on, sorry.
No, I think, so I wouldn't want my players only to do adductor exercises, absolutely not. So they do a lot of strength work and plyometrics, and if sometimes they do different groin injury exercises, but that's also because they need to be able to kick a ball and run fast, and so it's more thought of as in a performance perspective, that they get strong and have strong muscles, and then hopefully we'll prevent some injuries along the way.
Yeah, no, which all makes sense. I don't know, have you seen one of Colin Fuller's paper about the return on investment, effectively, and his example would be if you look at the burden and basically the days lost from hamstring exercises, from hamstring injuries in Premier League footballers, and then you work out how long those same footballers would have to spend on Nordic. If you did it across the whole squad, actually you end up losing more time by doing the Nordic hamstring exercises than you do from the injury itself. And so we do need to be slightly careful. I mean, whilst we always feel like we should prevent all injuries, right? But we're not going to.
No.
And so I don't know. In terms of that return on investment, I mean, how much, in terms of time, how much can you spend on injury prevention when you've got people who also have a job and a family and they can't train all the time? And how does it fit?
I mean, that fits worse when you have less time. And then we need to pick and choose, like I said. Like some, if you have more resources, you can pick two. No, less resources, you can, like we have, it's knee injuries that we had last season. Let's focus on that. And other things will be less important. That's just the way it is. And I once worked at a club with less resources where I was playing physio. And then we had literally like 7 minutes after 2 trainings where I could like draw the girls in front of the strength and conditioning room because that was closed actually. So we were like using benches and whatever. And then we had like 6 weeks of ankle knee focus and maybe one. And then, so we did like very focused things in 7 minutes and did maybe periods of that. Yeah. So, I mean, it's
doable.
It's doable. But then I stopped playing for that club and I know they stopped doing it.
Of course,
so if there's not someone dragging them into the hallway, it's not going to happen. But
and that's what it takes. It takes a champion in the team.
Very challenging.
So, so I think probably drawing my questions to a close, which you'll be pleased to hear, I'm sure. So if you were to go back and start this again, what would you do as your first study? Would it be the same study or would it be something different?
No, it would be the same study because I think the first one was really, it was important to see the whole picture. Absolutely. So I've thought about it, like what I would do differently, and I'm not sure I would. I mean, there are many possible ways to do a lot of things. Yep. So there are lots of things that needs to be done later. But yeah.
So and if you'd have done that study first and kind of you weren't completely focused on groin from the outset, do you think that the results of that first study would have sent you down a different path, or do you think you still would have found this as the key thing?
You mean if I had not done this like in depth, if I had just done that and seen the results?
So you've done study 1 first, which was the broad element of
no, the
injuries.
groin actually didn't scream at you in that study. So there were, I mean, it was the third most like single diagnosis, and we saw this. So it wasn't like, wow, here we have a huge problem. But when we did the in-depth study, and because in the first study, like the adductor, for example, like they were under thigh injuries in that study. Inguinal related pain ended up in abdominal or something. So they were like scattered. So what study number 2 did was basically collect them, and then we could maybe see better the true burden of it, if you will.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I think that reflection is probably very fair, and I think, and I think just to finish, I mean, the nice thing is that you've got a tool that you think can do something about it. Because one of the problems is when we think about injury prevention is we go, oh, we must prevent that injury, and everybody looks at each other and go, well, how do we do that? Whereas here you've got a tool to test. So so congratulations on everything. I think it was a lovely thesis to read. Really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed our discussion, and I'll finish for now. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now have a 15-minute break before we continue the discussion with the second opponent. I ask you to be back here in the auditorium by 14:40. Thank you.
14:40. Yeah. Thank you. Classic.
Japp, hörs det? Det blir bra. Ja, toppen.
Welcome back. I now invite the second opponent, Joanna Quist, to continue the discussion with the candidate.
So now we can continue. I hope that you can hear me. Good. And would like to thank first Keith for having a lot of questions, and you had a really nice discussion. So I hope that we can continue with this discussion now. I just want to start saying about who I am, and I'm working most with knee injuries, and that is my area. And also a little bit some studies on female football players. I have done so the ACL is my area. I've done some on Achilles tendon rupture and not so much on groin injuries, so it was a pleasure to read your thesis. I've learned a lot. I've done a little bit with hip and osteoarthritis, but the region that you said before, so the pelvic girdle bone during pregnancy has been one part of my research also, and I'm engaged on that now. So going to your research. We're going to discuss a second and a third study more in detail now after the first discussions. And this has been published, as all your studies. And I was looking about the definition of groin injuries. So I have just the pictures, the slides, so you can see the numbers also. So you reported in the second study that you had 124 groin injuries, but in the first study you had only 62 groin injuries. You talked a little bit about that now, in the hour before, but then it is the same cohort that you used. Can you explain?
Yeah, that's a very valid question. And that is this thing that I talked about earlier, about the adductors. And so the adductors in paper 1 are not actually hip and groin injuries, but thigh injuries. And that was just... Yeah, so our system was that way. So hamstring, quadriceps, and adductor-related injuries were thigh injuries in the first paper. But then I collect all the injuries in one group in the second paper, and then they become 18%. Yeah. So yeah, so adductor injuries and actually inguinal injuries were not under the hip and groin in paper 1.
Yeah, and so it was 33 adductor injuries that were combined there.
Yeah.
And then maybe, some
and then
more.
the physio reported injuries.
Yes, exactly. But so when reporting, what is then the incidence of groin injuries, if you want to say to somebody? So groin injuries, should the adductors be there or not?
I think they should be there. Yeah. I think so. Of course, you can have an adductor injury like closer to your thigh, closer to your knee. They are, but I would say that the adductors should probably be within the hip and groin. Groin, basically.
But in the first study, you used a definition that everybody used.
Yeah.
So how is it in previous studies? How has that been reported?
Actually different. So for example, the youth elite women's study, they only include hamstring and quadriceps under thigh, and adductor is under hip and groin.
Okay. Is the difference between the proximal adductor and distal adductor pain? Or how do the player report that?
Yeah, the player actually reports a picture. So they point at a picture, and the picture is this green and orange part in the picture that I showed in my presentation. So there's this tiny orange triangle that is basically just proximal adductor pubic area, and then we have a little bit higher up and where most of the, for example, iliopsoas injuries were reported in that area, while the adductor injuries were reported more in this orange triangle. So they report the location of the injury on a picture. Okay. Yeah.
So it is more, and then you do the classification.
And then the physio went in and examined and had to give a diagnosis within this sport diagnostic coding system and then they got moved to thigh, basically, because that was how the system works. Yeah.
Okay. But you found also that you found more groin injuries and adductor injuries compared to previous studies. So in the second study, more than in the first,
Yeah.
and more than previous studies. Why do you think it's like that?
I mean, it could be because we had extra focus on it, so we were looking for them and asked the players or the physios to examine them, and yeah. So that's one thing, but it could also be that our study there was, for example, 10 years since the last study had been done, at least in Norway. So there was a lot of time, and a lot has changed in the game of football. More faster changes of direction and things like that. So it could have something to do with that. But it's hard to say. It's hard to give a.
And that you talked, the difference and change in the football. Do you think that the definition can be different, or has been different?
That's a good question. I actually think if I'm thinking about the studies that have collected all injuries, most of them use this hip and groin. So they actually have hip and groin symptoms together. And I sometimes don't know, is that also outside on the hip, or is that only groin area, or I'm not sure. So, but it could have something to do with the definition. But because in our case, we, especially in the second paper, we use a definition that has not been used before. So it's absolutely possible, maybe, that because we collected all the groin injuries in one place, that's the reason why we get these a little bit higher.
Yeah, a little bit. You try to find something, and then you find it.
We collected it in abdominal, in hip and groin, in thigh. Yeah, so that's a good point.
Yeah, you did. Yes, you wanted to find it. Then about the reporting system, you talked a lot about that, and that was self-reported. And here you find, and you had a discussion that if it is self-reported, you find more injuries than compared to if the physiotherapists do the exam or the medical staff. But in your case, you had 11 players or 11 injuries that were identified by the physiotherapist and were not self-reported. How was that? So that was the opposite.
Yeah, so I think we do find more injuries than for example, we found 124 groin injuries, and the 2-season study from Ireland that was done a year later found 21 injuries. So I think we actually I don't think we have underreporting, maybe, or but because we are combining these two methods, that they work together, because there are going to be players who don't report their injuries. And then it's good to have the physio on the pitch that can pick them up. Yeah. So I think, Yeah, but do you think that, so these 11 injuries, did the player just don't report it, or did they had missing answers during these weeks? They had missing answers that week, yeah. So they didn't report, so I didn't have exposure data, for example, on some of those. And so some of those players actually just weren't answering that much. Maybe we're just one of those players, the self-report, and therefore got picked up by their physio.
Yeah, it should be like that. And then some players had multiple injuries, so it was not only one place. How did you handle that? Or how did you report that?
Yeah, we handled it in a way that we asked the physio to rank the clinical importance. So if the adductor problem was the one that was most affecting the player, that was like number one, and then if it was pubic or iliopsoas or something else, it was ranked number two. Yeah.
Have you done any sub-analysis there? Because the pubic was more serious injuries compared to the adductors. Or maybe if they had an ankle sprain compared to adductors. Have you looked at that?
No, we didn't look. We didn't look into that. We saw that with the pubic injuries, for example, they could have had an adductor injury first, and then it was a pubic injury, or they coexisted also, the pubic and the adductor injuries. But no, we didn't do any sub-analysis on it, even though that would have been interesting to see if those with multiple diagnoses. In our case, I think it was 22% of the case, of those examined, at least. We didn't look into if they had more severe symptoms or.
So maybe actually there were more injuries than you reported. It can be more. If they had multiple, you never report that they had an adductor injury. So maybe looking at the amount of injuries. How many injuries they had.
Yeah, so you're thinking if a player had two, No, if she reported, if they were both put in the system and counted as, no, that would have been counted as one groin injury, but like with levels, so adductor.
If they have one adductor and one ankle sprain.
Is
it 2 injuries?
That's 2 injuries.
That's 2 injuries.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
But then, good. And one more question about this self-reporting. So the players are asked to answer every week about how many problems do you have. So what happens with a person if, I have to think about, do I have problems? Oh, yes, I have problems. And they find the problems. What happens with a person?
They focus on the problem. And so that's a very good point. I mean, and I've thought a little bit about this. Like, you're asked every week if you have a health problem or not. And what we see in research, what happens is they are eager in the beginning, and they report everything. And then they report less as time passes, because they, and especially maybe the milder injuries that maybe drop out. But so they are usually eager in the beginning, but then with maybe reporting fatigue or we can explain it with that. I would think there would be a tendency to maybe report a little bit less as time passes. I don't know if you agree on me.
Do you think that? And maybe you have more missing also as time passes.
As time
because
passes,
it's a fatigue of answering. But do you think that the girls, the football players, may have a fear of getting injuries by thinking about injuries every Sunday? I don't know.
That's a very valid question.
Fear may increase the risk for new injuries?
I hadn't thought about it like that. But we know, if you work in a clinic, you know it matters what you say. So if you're asking someone to think about their problems, I would think it makes sense that they would report more, because I'm asking you do you have a problem? I can tell you a few, but I wouldn't go to you and tell you about them if you didn't ask me. So I think
I'm always thinking about that, asking the people with ACL injuries. I should not ask them every day, how stable are you? Do you have any instability? Or should I? Maybe I'm unstable. So
absolutely. Our words matter.
So then about this reporting, you did the clinical examinations, or maybe not you, but the physical therapist place. It was, and it was not on all the girls, not all the players, but it was only on 53% of them. How did that affect the frequency of the groin injuries? The frequency of the groin injuries, and also the diagnosis, so the doctors.
I mean, that is a limitation to our study that we just have to acknowledge, that only 53% of the groins were examined by the physio. But we still captured 67 groin injuries and examined them. And like I said, if we put that in perspective with the Irish study that in 2 years had captured 21 groin injury, and I think the UEFA Elite study had like around 75 injuries or something like that during, we think, 2 seasons. So, and when I think of it like that, I'm like, okay, maybe we got the most severe injuries, and it looks like that. They caused the 80% of the total time loss from groin injury. So basically, this study presents the clinical findings and imaging findings of the more severe groin injuries female players have, could we say?
And maybe these injuries are the more important also, because some injuries, just having some problems and some pains for some days, maybe it's not so important. Yeah,
exactly, and that's why I still think this study is important, because if you look at the numbers, like, okay, it just examined half of it, so we don't know. But because we are, it seems like we are getting the more severe groin injuries, these are also the ones who are more important to prevent.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it will affect the diagnosis, because there are 53 players who weren't examined. But it made me a little bit more confident in our numbers from the examinations when I looked at the data that had been, the physios had put into the system without doing a clinical examination. So they can set the diagnosis basically in this system that they have. And it mirrored the pattern we found in the clinical examinations. So we don't know how they came to that conclusion. So, but again, I felt it supported at least our findings from the clinical examination.
But the physiotherapists who reported the injuries without doing the clinical examinations, maybe they did something similar to do the...
Most likely.
Yeah. And that is also a question. So it was 20 physiotherapists.
Yes.
But also the injuries. So maybe you answered here that.
I mean, again, another limitation to it. Like 20 physical therapists doing groin injury, the clinical examination will affect the reliability of them. That's. We have studies who have looked at the inter-rater reliability of clinical examination in 2 people. And it's actually really good when you only have one diagnosis, which was in our case for 78% of the groins or something like that. But we didn't have 2 examiners, we had 20, so our numbers are maybe not that good, because it was like perfect in this study, but it makes me want to think at least that it's good enough. So, and then there was these 22% who had more than one clinical entity. And what previous studies had found was that ranking the clinical entities by importance could increase the reliability of the examination. So that was basically we tried what we could to standardize and have the examinations as reliable as possible. But both of these things, that it was only 50% of them, and 20 different physical therapists did the examinations, are just limitations that we have to
but maybe these are the physiotherapists working with the teams, so hopefully they are quite experienced doing this. So they're not just new physiotherapists?
No, it differed. So there were physiotherapists who had maybe worked when we didn't collect data on it, which would have been interesting, but there was all from I've been a physio for 1.5, 2 years to having 20 plus years of experience with national teams, and so there was quite a range in the experience of physios.
Then another thing with the clinical examination was the timing, and you have discussed that, and you talked on that before also. And many of your injuries, few of the injuries are acute, so you have this range from 2 days after the injury. But then the other injuries, when you have the largest time from injury to examinations, 203 days. So it's quite,
203, yeah. And actually, I remember thinking about if that should be included or not. It's basically an injury that the player has comes in with from previous season. But I thought that it's still there, the problem. So we're going to clinically examine you and put a diagnosis on it, even though maybe that diagnosis has been there for a year. But I thought it was important to include. There were 2 cases, I think, that were had happened last season, and the girls took with them in the next season, that we included in the study. I thought to give the best possible, at least the biggest picture of groin injuries within women's football.
Do you think that was the same injury that they came into the study with? So it was the same that they also continued to have?
Yeah. So and for one of them, for example, she had her own physio, and they had been working on it, and she basically filled out a standardized form for me too and delivered.
Okay, that sounds good. And about this clinical examination, was it any problems? Did the physiotherapists reported any problems by doing them, or was it easy to understand what they had to do?
It was relatively. There were 4 that asked for that we came in and went through the examination with them once in the beginning. So, but after that, it was. I mean, groin is hard, but and then there were 9 cases, I think, that got second opinion at the FA Medical Center, idrettsmedisinske. But I mean, it took time. So I think in the beginning it was a bigger, you need to learn it. So it went a little bit slow in the beginning, but then as they got used to, they knew what was the next point, and it went faster and faster. And they got good at it.
Okay, and we hope that physiotherapists are in all the teams, in all the trainings, so that they can do it that often.
Yes.
Often, you said that before.
That's our dream.
Yeah, exactly. So going on to the MRIs also, here you have less, again, so only 42 injuries that were examined. It was 34% that had the MRIs. And you have some descriptions about the inter-observer agreement. We talked about the reliability before. And how was that, and what is this?
So there were 2 different radiologists who looked at the pictures separately. And without knowing the diagnosis, and looked at both groins. And then when they had looked at the diagnosis and filled out this form on their own, they then met and went over the things that they did not agree on.
Okay, so they got the diagnosis before they met? No.
So they didn't know the diagnosis when they looked at the picture. They just filled out everything they saw or didn't saw. And then they met when they had done that, and went over what they didn't agree on, and looked at the pictures again and explained, and came to an agreement to what should and shouldn't be in there.
Do you know in how many cases they had to change the diagnosis? And this is also about the acute and non-acute, because they classified it as acute and non-acute, and you already know it from the...
No, I can't remember. I remember some of the iliopsoas cases being changed to rectus femoris after the MRI, because then we found something in in the rectus femoris and nothing in the iliopsoas. So that's only.
So you changed the diagnosis according to MRI. So MRI was a golden standard, you can say, or
only if it was, because we had 2 complete tears of the rectus femoris. We didn't change it if it was like a mild, so the clinical examination was the clinical examination, but if we found, if I remember correctly, if we found like a grade 3 injury in another muscle, then the rectus femoris trumped it. So there was one grade 3 rectus femoris injury that had been clinically diagnosed as iliopsoas, so we changed it to rectus femoris.
Okay. You write somewhere that it's good to have both the clinical examination, the self-reporting clinical examination, and the MRI to come to the consensus to be quite sure about what it is. Do you believe that we should do all this, or?
Absolutely not. Like clinically, no. But we can use, like MRI can be useful if you have, like clinical examination, I think it's what we should rely on. We can use imaging to exclude red flags, basically, if there's something we're not sure about or afraid of, sarcomas or like fractures or something like that. But no, MRI should not be a go-to after 3 days of time loss. That's for research purposes, absolutely. But so more in terms of if the rehabilitation isn't going anywhere, or if then we can think we could take an MRI, but we need to be really careful and look at the clinical examination and the MRI findings in a combination and make a decision based on both, because we can find a lot of things that will matter and not matter.
Yeah. Did you find that? Did you find many things that may matter and not matter?
So, I mean, we found something in 76% of the cases. So some like non-acute finding, bone marrow edema, or just basically whatever it was. And then we also found the same on the non-injured side, because they didn't know which side was injured, basically, the radiologists. So we found a lot of things, and that's basically what research in men's football has also seen, that basically, for example, bone marrow edema in the pubic bone is a symptom of playing football rather than an injury.
Because you had quite a lot of bilateral or contralateral findings that were not problems.
Clinically relevant,
No,
basically.
Exactly. The timing. Here it was also quite...
And we have these 2 cases that make this a little bit like these 400 days. So these players had an MRI. So we took an MRI also of the cases that happened last year. So that's why we have this 421. But those were only 2 cases. But in general, because some of the, or 73% of the cases were gradual onset injuries, it was actually possible that they had pain for 2 weeks before they were eligible for an MRI. And I mean, we can discuss if that was a good idea to put that number there, but I've wondered a little bit about that in hindsight. But it was basically to not maybe we don't need to take an MRI of everything, but like, so we dismissed the mildest injuries, but like we wanted to catch also the non-time loss groin injuries, basically. So if they had symptoms for 2 weeks, so that can explain some of it. So then it's 14 days, and then we want an MRI for them, and they could take a week to get an MRI. So then we're in 21 days, and this time passes. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you are close to the median, and then you have the big range, as you said. But
Yeah.
Looking at the interquartile rate, it is up to 50. So 25% of your players had more than 51 days.
Yeah. And that's a lot.
Do you think that it would change anything in the diagnosis? Similar question as the clinical examination. Should it be something different?
It's a really good question. I mean, we are going to miss the mildest injuries. We are going to miss the acute injuries if, like, in a muscle that could have just dissolved if it was a adductor strain there. But I'm not sure about for example, the pubic edema and all of this, if that would be any different. But we definitely miss the mildest injuries if in 51 days and even in
Could
20.
it be a risk that you find something that is actually asymptomatic, but the person has problems on something else?
Yes.
As you find so much in the other side?
Absolutely, and I think so. I think I think a lot of what we found was asymptomatic.
So finally, some about how many injuries it was. Finally, it's a lot about the definition of it, and then how you did the examinations. Yeah, so that about the acute findings and the asymptomatic findings. Then you had quite a lot of players who had bilateral injuries. You reported 107 new injuries in 88 players. How did you handle this? Was it separate injuries, or it was a player with an injury?
It was a player. It was two. Like, it could be a player. If a player had a adductor injury and also iliopsoas injury at the same time, that's one injury. But you can have recurrent injuries if the player, for example. So this could be a player who doesn't have injuries at the same time. So this could be a player, so 88 players, it could be a player that has first an adductor injury, and then 2 months later she has maybe another adductor injury on the other side, or iliopsoas injury or something else. And it can be that a player that has an injury on both sides. So it can be both. It can be a player having multiple injuries over time, or it can be the same player having symptoms on both sides at the same time. Yeah, so...
Could you see if it was the more severe injuries? Or was it a special type of injuries?
No, I didn't, because that's a really good question. We didn't do any sub-analysis on that. But yeah, that would have been.
But you talked a little bit about risk factors before, and the biggest risk factor is a previous injury.
Previous injury,
yes.
Absolutely. So I mean, that would make sense clinically. But we didn't do any analysis on it.
Okay. Then, so it's more specific questions here. And then you find that the adductor injuries was the most frequent injuries, maybe not the most severe, but the most frequent injuries. But these were diagnosed from the 55% who had the clinical examination, and then only 43 who had the MRIs. So, and then you list that the adductor is really a problem. Is that the biggest problem, you believe, from the groin injuries? Are you confident with that, discussing all the definitions?
Yeah.
Like that? Yeah.
I mean, because we were talking about the clinical examination and that we only captured like 53% of the players, and so I've absolutely gone through this way of thinking, because I wanted to answer the question, what should we focus on in prevention? And because the adductor injuries were most common and the second most burdensome, and pubic injuries were those who were most burdensome, and they often, in I think 3 of 5 cases, the adductor injuries coexisted with the pubic injuries. So that put together, I was confident, yes, that the adductors were the biggest problem. Yeah, but that hip flexor, we couldn't look away from the hip flexors, but yes, that was my...
And that is the biggest problems in male.
Yeah.
Also, yes. And you have already, we're going to go to the third paper soon, but we have already a prevention program for adductors. But is there any prevention programs for hip flexors or pubic injuries? Is it tested?
No, and that's actually a really good question, because I've been thinking about like the pubic injuries, for example, because some of the players in our cohort also were quite young and could have epiphysitis instead of not an adductor injury, basically. And these injuries can be irritated by the Copenhagen adduction, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it's not the answer for everything. So I would basically just like to know more before going and telling everyone that they need to do the Copenhagen adduction or the adductor strengthening program. But it's actually good that we have something to build on. We have this good data from the male side. And I think it's a natural place to start, if we can say that. And then see how the girls respond to it. And what, yeah, that was basically the thought process.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just concluding for your second paper, you had the aim was to describe the prevalence, incidence, and burden of the groin injuries. And the rationale was that you wanted to optimize the preventive strategies for groin, to establish which structures, and then also which structures are the most commonly injured and which that contribute to the overall burden. And your conclusions was that the incidence was quite high. Is that correct? So you answered one of the questions. Then that the adductor-related injuries were the most common, as you said now also, and also followed by the hip flexors that you didn't use so much in the later paper, and also that the pubic-related injuries caused the most loss, as we talked. In the conclusions, you also had that the most MRI examinations demonstrated non-acute findings, so that may be because it was the timing, a little bit delay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, and the MRIs were not like diagnostic specific, basically.
Good. So I think that you could answer to your questions.
Yeah.
That's good. So going on to the third paper that's also published, and that is an assessor-blinded superiority randomized trial. And you said before that it was an efficacy trial. Is that correct with the definition?
That is correct. I thought
That's good.
I was like, what did I write in my paper?
Good to think about that, yes. And that is what they did actually. One exercise, the 3 levels of difficulty, 8 weeks, the low volume and the high volume. And all of this got stronger.
Yeah.
Yeah. And very fast. I'm really impressed. So little exercise, and you said that it took 5 minutes to do it each time, or?
It was different. Like the low volume protocol took a little time because it was only 1 set. It starts with 5 repetitions, and then we work up to 15, I think we ended up at. But only one set, 3 times a week, while the high volume group did 2 to 4 sets. So that did not take 5 minutes. I don't know how long, but maybe they were up in 10 minutes or, yeah easy.
Quite fast. But how is so in 8 weeks to get these results, and actually you had these results already after 4 weeks, they got stronger.
Yeah.
How can you explain that physiologically?
I mean, the strength gain was around 6%, so it was good. It wasn't, and it was significant from like the beginning to the end. But I mean, if at 4 weeks, it's mostly neurological adaptations and like learning, like doing the exercise and being, comfortable with it, I guess. So I would assume that after the 4 weeks, that's not morphological changes in the muscle. That usually happens somewhere after 6 or 8 weeks and maybe later. So I don't know, but my guess is a lot of it is some neurological adaptation. There shouldn't be for example, if we think about, we didn't test for learning effect, for example, but we did a reliability study of the force frame, the test.
The learning effect, you mean also for the testing?
For the testing, So basically, like, is it our testing that is the reason for this big strength gain? But from our data, at least, if I remember correctly, it was we did this. We tested the girls with a week in between. So these were female players from the Norwegian league, and there was around like a mean difference of 2 to 3% between, like, so that could be a learning effect.
That is,
So maybe if the learning effect is 2-3% and the strength gain is 6%, so maybe the real change is 4% or something like that.
Yeah. And that was the mean, but it was significant also. So all of them. Yeah. But also, so the neuromuscular adaptation, that's the first weeks, as you said. You also write that 90% of the players did this exercise before.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because we asked them if they were familiar with the exercise and if they'd done it in the past weeks or months, and they say yes, but we don't know how much they'd done or if they'd done it properly. Because what we saw is many of the players basically just did it almost an isometric plank and maybe moved the lower leg. And so I think not everyone did the Copenhagen adduction like we wanted them for 3 months progressively before, no. But they were familiar with it, but we don't know to what extent they basically did it well. Yeah.
I'm really impressed that it was so good, and also still, so I totally believe in what you're saying. We know from other studies also that people maybe have done rehabilitation or have done some training, and then when they're in the study, then you can see a lot of effects that shouldn't be there, because they should already have done this. So it's really impressive that you are there. Then the choice of this exercise. This exercise is eccentric, it's very heavy, and it's it is quite slow. And when does the adductor get injured? Is it in
it's usually in a rapid motion, or when it's moving from lengthening to shortening, so in that motion, basically extension to flexion or adduction from
and also quite fast.
Quite fast,
And-
acute injuries, because we only have mechanism data for that. But yeah, acute injuries happen like that.
Yeah. Should you do this exercise some other way to more adapt it to this injury?
That's actually a really good question, because and when in the beginning, when we were thinking about which projects we should do, one of the projects that came up was basically building on Joar Harø's work on the Copenhagen adduction in men and testing out different versions of doing the exercise. And one of the exercises that came up was this drop and catch version of it. So it's possible that that could basically be a progression from, just like in the Nordic hamstring, when you can control yourself down and up, you have maybe someone push in the back, so you need to grab yourself faster, or So that's a really good point, and something we thought about, and I think it's. I actually think I would be afraid of hurting myself if I would do it.
Exactly.
But maybe if you've built up strength, you should be able to handle a faster and faster load, probably. That would be interesting.
I think that would be good, but as you said, maybe a very big injury risk.
Yeah.
And I'm coming back to the injury risk, but
There are pros and cons.
Yeah, exactly. But actually, this exercise is also so specific to the adductors compared to the other programs.
Yeah.
So the participants that you use from 3 teams. You had 52 participants. And they came into the study with a different amount of previous injuries. And you write that so it was in the low volume, 36% of the players had a previous injury. And how can that affect the results from the intervention?
The randomization didn't quite manage to spread these evenly, and what I think can happen is that if you have a previous injury, maybe you're not as strong, so maybe that was the reason why, because the low volume group started out weaker than the high volume group. So that's why I argued maybe they had more room for improvement. If you started weaker, you have, you can get stronger. So that's the first thing that popped into my mind.
I read what you wrote there, that they had more for improvement, but they decided about which level they should have because of pain. So maybe they had also pain, maybe not. So deciding the level was related to the pain.
Yeah, actually, that was in the low volume group. I don't remember seeing any different data around the injured players, but in the high volume group, they dropped out, and they chose level 1 or 2. Okay. So that program was way too heavy for some previously injured players. It looked like, at least.
Okay,
So we saw more of that in the high volume group than in the low volume group.
It's quite complex. So you had the 3 teams and it was individual randomized, so risk for contamination.
Absolutely. When you have individual randomization, you have the risk of contamination, but that's why we decided to have 3 fantastic team instructor. So they were at every training. And they had control over which group they were in, which players were in which group. I didn't know, but they knew. So they instructed and had control over basically the contamination.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I don't think that I read that.
No.
I missed it.
Yeah.
Or something.
I think I have it in there.
That is really good. I had some question about the sample size, but I leave this.
Yeah.
And then we talked a little bit about this force frame. And you said about the learning effect. That is one thing. Is it anything? Do you think that it's a good measure?
I think it's a good measure. I think it's a good measure. It's a practical measure. And I do think, but I actually do think that the squeeze, the closest, the narrow position, basically, is a little bit narrow. So I've tried this myself, and it's actually quite hard to push really hard this close, which was the reason why I added the wider position. Both it's easier to press, but also because that's where the injury happens. It happens in outer range. That's why I was curious about that. But it is an isometric test, and we have an eccentric exercise. So it has its pros and cons, basically like every other test. But it was relatively reliable, and and it was also very practical. So we could measure these two positions in very short amount of time. Could take it to the players. It was COVID times, and the players couldn't come to us, so we went to them, and they had participated in a project the year before, and they basically said, yes, we can participate if it takes a really short time, because they did not want to go through like 3 strength tests and running and this, and no, they were not up for that.
And I think that is really important in research, to do it convenient and good for the
So
participants.
you win some, you lose some, basically. Yeah.
But are you sure that you measured maximal strength, isometric strength?
Oh, that's it's a bilateral test, so that will because it's a bilateral test, you have this phenomenon that you only squeeze as hard as your weaker leg, maybe.
Yeah.
And then also if you have, so if the one leg is a little bit painful, the other one can't push as hard as it can. So it has these downsides, basically. But we didn't have that much problem with pain.
Okay, it was my next question about
Okay,
pain.
yeah.
So it was good that you took
We
it.
had some, but then, then she just didn't push, and she became missing data. But that was the only one I remember that was like, at least vocal about that she felt it was uncomfortable to squeeze.
And it's always when you're doing a strength measurement, then you have to motivate the person.
Yeah.
And you said before it is the learning effect, but also do you think that as you had so good improvement of the strength, do you think that it is that the player want to show that, oh, I'm really stronger, so I do more the follow-ups?
Possibly. I at least, most of the girls were really motivated. It was actually really interesting to see, because it was like teams from the 2nd division, and then like a junior team for an elite club, but then has to play in the 2nd division, and then we had a 1st division team. So we had 2 teams who were like maybe, like the 1st division team like wanted to go to the elite, the professional league. You could sense how much they gave into the test a little bit. So the ones who, in the 1st division, for example, they pressed all they could. You could see it on their faces. You could see they were giving it all. While there were also just players who they pressed and then they were done.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was a wide range. So I was like screaming, go, 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 go on the side.
Were you afraid, did you do the test? You supervised the test?
I supervised the test, yeah.
Were you afraid if they could get injured when they did it?
No.
No?
But we had also, we had done this test. I had seen it done in a periodic health evaluation, for a year. We hadn't had problem with that, no.
And isometric is the most safe, maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So looking about the injury risk during the intervention, all the girls you started with the level 3, the the heaviest.
Yeah.
And then they decided to go to level 2 or 1, as you said. Did they get injury? Many of them had, how do you say, muscle pain after doing the exercises, but any injury?
We had 2 and 3 in each group. Now I can't remember, but we had some groin pain, but they were equally. They were
6,
both.
so
Yeah,
you had
so
3
they were
and
2
3.
and 2 in each
I think
group.
it was 3 and 3.
Yeah, 3 and 3 maybe. Yeah,
I think so.
So, but it didn't happen like during the exercise or anything like that. But I have thought about that. Like it's actually natural to maybe start at the lower level, and maybe if I was doing this program again, I would start with an isometric plank instead of lying on your side and doing hip abduction on your side lying. So that would be if a player would come to me, I would probably first test if she could do a plank version, and then see if I could hold her knee, and then see if I could hold. I mean, but no, we didn't experience they getting injured using the exercise. They probably tested out the first level. They didn't do like a whole session with level 3, I think, and then. I think they've probably tested number 3 and thought, no, this is too difficult, and then went straight down to 2 or.
Okay.
Yeah, and only 10% of the girls actually used the lightest variation. Yeah.
So the majority was in
The
level
majority
2.
was in either,
2 or 3.
2 or 3.
But actually, you said injuries. So during this intervention time, you had 11%. So 6 players had reported groin injury. It is 11% of them.
Yeah.
It's quite high.
Yeah.
Compared to the second study that you did.
Yeah, but actually these were very minor. Like they did not. I think any of them didn't produce more time loss than 2 days. So it was. I don't know if there's more muscle soreness, but we reported as we like. Did you have any pain in your groin? And it was So they maybe missed 1 or 2 trainings, but these were minor injuries. All 6.
That's good.
Yeah.
That was important.
Yeah.
And also that question if they have muscle soreness, if they reported that as an injury or not. But,
Yes, and that's sometimes not always hard. A clear cut. No.
Regarding the high, how actually they got stronger, they should have muscle soreness.
Yes.
So it should not be a drawback.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And some are more used to that than others.
Yes, exactly. And also doing this, you talked about that before, to have this before the training or after the training, and maybe it's good for the implementation to deliver to the coach and to see how they should do it.
Yeah.
And I think the players choose to do it before the training as a part of the warm-up.
Yeah.
What do you think? When should they do that?
I mean, the lower volume protocol is okay to do, but actually the higher volume protocol was not designed as a warm-up, and if this was my team, I would have preferably done that after, or basically just on a strength training session. So basically the high volume protocol was more designed basically to work in the gym, maybe, than to be a pitch or be done afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So-
then the risk for injury maybe increase if you do it after, as it did increase if you're not warmed up.
Yeah, I think before, I mean, like in the prevention study done in males, they did it as a part of their warm-up, the low volume protocols. I'm not. I think that's okay to do the low volume protocol at the start in the warm-up, but I think the high volume protocol was too heavy to do as a warm-up. Yeah, so I can understand that some of the players thought the load was too high because they could feel it maybe at their football training afterwards, and that's not what football players want.
No.
To
Good.
something affect their football training.
So we've talked about the testing. And so you say that this study is like a step for the development of a preventive intervention. You answered a little bit, so what can you do that to implement this exercise? You said maybe the high volume should be after the training.
Yeah.
Should you use the high volume or the low volume?
Our findings basically say you can do both. They're going to give you the same results. So I'm thinking many will do less if that gives you the same results. But these were not professional players. So I think in this setting, I would use low volume protocol, preferably with 3 steps, and maybe instead of doing side-lying hip abduction, having a plank version of it as the first stage would be a good start. But I think for a professional team that has strength training at least 2 times a week, the heavy protocol is probably more in terms of, then it's not a warm-up, but it's a strength training program, basically. So you can basically choose. Like, I know girls who would rather do that one because they thought the other ones, there were 2 who said high volume was too little. So you can, you will find all sorts of players, but and girls are usually good at doing their strength work. That's my experience, at least. But yeah, so we basically say you can do both, but if you're going to do the high volume protocol, don't do it as a warm-up, do it rather as a strength training session, or at least after football training.
You talked before lunch about individualization of the prevention program. Do you think that they could do some in between?
That this should,
The low volume or the high volume or something in between, as you didn't find any differences?
No, absolutely. I think basically, but what I have been thinking about the high volume protocol, there were more girls, not that many, but more chose the lighter, like level 2 than level 3, than in the low volume group. And I also think if you do 5 repetitions, you do them properly. But if you do, you're going to do, I don't know, 20 reps in this session, you just rush through it. So we don't have like intensity or like time under tension or any like Borg measure for the intensity of the exercise. We missed that. So maybe that's why the programs just got kind of evened out, because we lost quality in the high volume. So that's at least something I've been thinking about. It's
a lot of things that you have to think about doing the proper exercise in the prevention program. And now this is only for one injury, it's only for one muscle. And so many aspects to look at. As you show in the second study, you had a lot of hip flexors exercises. So how can you start to find a good exercise for the hip flexors? What is the next study on that?
That actually, Trond Krosshaug has been, and maybe someone else, I at least know that Trond has been doing it. He has been, and some master students have been working on a plank. It's basically, they examined like the Copenhagen exercise, and then like a hip flexion version of that, and like a mix of the 2. So you basically go from abduction into extension and then into flexion. So it looks really hard, and I haven't tried it myself, but it was really it was really interesting. So people have been So there are studies out there.
So I thought that you should say another exercise, but then you can
combine it.
So that is perfect.
If that's possible.
And then in your first study, you find that there was many other injuries also, and health problems and like that. So you need to find the exercise for everything.
Yeah.
How are you going to continue? What are you going to do next?
I mean, I think we need to think holistically. So, I mean, this is just one piece of the puzzle. I mean, it's an exercise that we know works well for women as well as men. And it's basically, like I said, in my context, if it's a professional women's team, we are thinking basically a holistic strengthening program. Like we are, so I don't think, I don't know what like my next step would be, but basically just we could examine if this exercise actually can prevent injuries. That would be the next step. And then maybe we could compare it to the double exercise that Trond is working on. So that would be an interesting study.
You have at least 2 studies.
Yeah.
You have to do. Okay. So I thank you very much. I don't
Thank you.
have any more questions. Oh yes, I have many questions. But
Yeah.
I think that I will not
Time's up.
do them now. So thanks.
Thanks are due both to the candidate and to the examination committee. The examination committee will now leave the room to evaluate the dissertation and make their final decision. I ask the rest of you to stay in this auditorium, and I will announce the committee's decision within 5 to 15 minutes. Okay. The examination committee has found the dissertation satisfactory. The committee's conclusion is unanimous. On behalf of the Norwegian School of Sports Sciences, I hereby award Solveig Thorarinsdottir the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, PhD in Sports Science. Congratulations. You will receive your diploma at the ceremony in August at the start of the next academic year. I will now ask the committee and the new doctor to join me in a procession out of the auditorium, and I hereby declare the disputation for completed.